100 islanders stood at the edge of his cove, their war canoes darkening the horizon like a storm cloud ready to break. Their faces, painted with grief and fury, locked onto Captain Elias Kane, a man who'd spent years hiding from the world. Drums beat a rhythm that pulsed like a heartbeat, each thud a warning that his solitary life was about to end. They hadn't come for trade or talk. They'd come for answers about a body he'd buried 3 days ago. One simple act of mercy had brought a tribe to his doorstep, and Elias was about to learn whether it would cost him his life. Or something worse. Rewind 3 days. The Caribbean sun burned hotter than a ship's cannon, scorching the jagged rocks of Elias's hidden cove. Waves crashed like thunder against the cliffs, spraying salt that stung the air and clung to his weathered skin. At 40, Captain Elias Kane was a ghost of the pirate he'd once been. His hands, scarred from 100 battles, now hauled fishing nets instead of cutlasses. His eyes, once sharp enough to spot a Navy frigate at dawn, now scanned the horizon for nothing but solitude. His ship, the Black Dawn, was gone, stolen by a mutinous crew who'd left him for dead 5 years ago. This cove, tucked between forgotten islands, was his fortress, his prison, his penance. For 5 years he'd spoken to no one but the wind and the gulls. Until that morning. He was mending a net, the coarse rope biting into his palms when something caught his eye. A shape on the shore, half buried in the tide's foam. At first he thought it was driftwood, twisted and broken by the sea. But driftwood didn't bleed. Elias dropped the net, his heart pounding like a war drum. He approached cautiously, his boots sinking into wet sand, every instinct screaming danger. The figure was a young man, no older than 20, his dark skin glistening with seawater, his throat slashed clean. Blood stained the sand crimson, pooling around a carved wooden amulet clutched in his stiff hand. The wounds weren't from a storm or a shark. This was murder, deliberate and cold. Elias's breath caught. He'd seen death before, dealt it even, but this felt different. Wrong. The amulet gleamed in the sunlight, its intricate carvings unfamiliar yet heavy with meaning. A tribal symbol, maybe. Elias knelt beside the body, his shadow falling across the boy's face. Those lifeless eyes stared up at him, wide with the terror of a final moment. He should walk away. Burn the body. Pretend he'd never seen it. This was 1715, and the Caribbean was a lawless sea where helping a stranger could get you hanged, or worse. Every pirate, Navy man, and islander within 100 miles would tell him the same thing. Bury your conscience deeper than the corpse. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of his own crew's betrayal, their knives flashing as they took his ship. Maybe it was the weight of 5 years alone, each day heavier than the last. Or maybe it was the amulet, its carvings whispering of a people he didn't know but couldn't ignore. Elias's hands moved before his mind could argue. He carried the body to a hidden grove, where palm fronds whispered secrets and the soil was soft enough to dig. The work was grueling, the sun relentless, but he dug deep, his muscles burning with effort he hadn't felt in years. He laid the islander in the earth, placing the amulet gently on his chest. "Rest easy, lad," he whispered, the words rusty from disuse. He marked the grave with a smooth stone, the kind his mother once said carried prayers to the stars. It felt right. It felt human. But as he stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, a chill ran through him. Footprints in the sand. Not his. Fresh. Leading from the shore to the cliffs above. Someone had been watching. The horizon was empty, but the air felt heavier now, charged like the calm before a squall. Elias scanned the cliffs, his old pirate instincts flaring. No movement. No sound but the waves. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him, hidden in the shadows of the palms. That night, as he sat in his weathered cabin, the wind carried a new sound. Drums. Distant, rhythmic, relentless. They weren't the cheerful beats of a festival. These were war drums calling across the sea, summoning something, or someone, to his cove. Elias gripped his rusty cutlass, its blade dull but heavy with memory. 3 days ago he thought he was just doing the right thing. Now he was about to face the consequences. If you were Elias, would you bury a stranger, knowing it might bring 100 warriors to your door? Would you risk everything for a dead man's honor, or walk away to save your own skin? Drop your choice in the comments. I need to know where you stand. And if this tale of courage and mystery has you hooked, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will shake Elias's world to its core. The drums are getting louder. The canoes are coming. And the truth about that amulet is about to change everything. The moon hung low over the Caribbean cove, its silver light slicing through the palm fronds like a blade through canvas. Captain Elias Kane dug into the soft earth, his hands blistered from the shovel, each scoop a rebellion against the solitude he'd wrapped around himself like armor. The islander's body lay beside him, wrapped in a tattered sailcloth, the carved wooden amulet resting on his chest. Waves crashed against the cliffs, their rhythm a grim echo of the war drums he'd heard earlier. Elias's breath came in sharp gasps, not from exertion but from the weight of what he'd done. Burying a stranger was one thing. Burying a man whose death could bring a tribe's wrath was another. 5 years alone had taught him to trust no one, to fear every shadow. Yet here he was, defying every instinct, honoring a boy he'd never known. The grave was deep now, deep enough to hide the truth. Or so he hoped. As he lowered the body into the earth, Elias whispered words he hadn't spoken since he was a boy, a sailor's prayer for safe passage to whatever lay beyond. The amulet gleamed one last time before he covered it with soil, its carvings etched into his memory like a warning. Dawn broke, painting the cove in hues of gold and blood. Elias stood on the shore, the salt air stinging his eyes, his cutlass heavy at his side. The grave was hidden, tucked beneath the grove's whispering palms, but the world felt different now. Wrong. He scanned the beach where he'd found the body. The tide had washed away the blood but not the footprints. Fresh tracks, too deliberate to be chance, led from the shore to the cliffs above his cabin. Not his boots. Someone else's. Someone who'd seen him drag the body. His heart pounded like a cannon's recoil. He followed the tracks, his old pirate instincts waking from their long slumber. They stopped at the cliff's edge where the sand gave way to rock, as if the watcher had vanished into the air. Elias's gaze swept the horizon. Empty. Too empty. The sea was a liar, hiding threats in its depths. He'd learned that the hard way when his crew betrayed him, stealing the Black Dawn and leaving him for dead. Back at his cabin, Elias's mind churned like a storm-tossed ship. 5 years ago he'd been Captain Kane, terror of the Spanish Main, a man who'd outwitted navies and rival pirates alike. But mercy had been his undoing. He'd spared a rival captain, a man who'd begged for his life, only to watch his own crew turn on him. Knives flashed in the moonlight, his first mate's laugh cutting deeper than any blade. "You're too soft, Kane," they'd sneered as they sailed away, his ship a fading shadow on the horizon. That betrayal had driven him to this cove, to a life of nets and silence. But burying the islander felt like a step back toward the man he'd been, a man who believed in something beyond survival. Redemption maybe. Or foolishness. The line between the two was thin as a rapier's edge. By midday the signs of trouble multiplied. Smoke rose from a distant hill, curling into the sky like a serpent. Not a cooking fire. A signal. Elias's blood ran cold. Someone was talking to someone else and his cove was the subject. He checked his defenses, a rusty cutlass, a flintlock pistol with 3 shots, a fishing spear sharpened to a wicked point. Pitiful against a war party. He'd fought off scavengers before, drunken sailors or desperate castaways, but islanders were different. They moved like ghosts, struck like lightning. If they came, they'd come for blood. Or answers. He wasn't sure which was worse. Elias paced the cabin, its weathered boards creaking under his boots. The amulet's carvings haunted him. Spirals and stars, symbols of a people he didn't know but couldn't ignore. Had the boy been important? A chief's son? A warrior? The wrong answer could turn his sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. That night the drums returned. Louder now. Closer. Their rhythm slithered through the palms, a pulse that set his teeth on edge. Elias stood at his cabin door, the cutlass in one hand, the pistol in the other. The sea was black as ink but he could feel them out there. Watching. Waiting. He'd buried the boy to honor him, to quiet the ghosts of his own failures. But ghosts didn't stay buried. Not in this place. Not when blood called to blood. By the second night, a new sign appeared. A single canoe, gliding silently across the cove's mouth, its paddles slicing the water like knives. It vanished before he could move, but the message was clear. They knew. They were coming. And they weren't alone. Elias's mind raced. Run. Where? The nearest port was a week's sail, and his skiff couldn't outrun war canoes. Fight? Against how many? The drums grew louder, their beat methodical, terrifying. He thought of the boy's eyes, wide with fear and death. He thought of his crew's betrayal, the mutiny that cost him everything. He thought of the man he'd been, the man he might still be. The cove, once his refuge, felt like a trap closing around him. The air was thick with the tang of seaweed and salt, the promise of a storm brewing beyond the horizon. Elias gripped his cutlass tighter. Whatever was coming, he'd face it. Not because he was brave, but because running hadn't saved him before. And because something in that boy's lifeless face had reminded him that mercy, even for a stranger, was worth the risk. If you were Elias, would you arm yourself for a fight you couldn't win, or try to explain a kindness that might be mistaken for a crime? Drop your choice in the comments. I need to know what you do when the drums are closing in. If this pirate's tale of courage and danger has you hooked, hit that subscribe button, because the next twist will test Elias like never before. The canoes are coming. The storm is breaking. And the truth is about to surface like a shipwreck in a squall. Dawn broke over the cove like a blade splitting the sky, the first rays glinting off 100 war canoes crowding the horizon. Their paddles sliced the water like silent knives, each stroke a heartbeat closer to Captain Elias Kane's reckoning. He stood alone on the rocky shore, his rusty cutlass gripped tight, its weight a grim reminder of battles long past. The islanders poured onto the beach, their war paint gleaming like blood under the rising sun, their spears and clubs raised in a chorus of menace. 100 pairs of eyes locked onto him, burning with grief, fury, and something else, betrayal. At their head stood Cale, the chieftain, his face carved from stone, his voice booming like thunder over the waves. "You buried my son," he roared, and desecrated his spirit. "Give me his body, or your blood will stain this sand." Elias's heart pounded like a war drum. 3 days ago he buried a stranger to honor him. Now 100 warriors demanded answers, and his cove, his sanctuary, was a battlefield waiting to ignite. Elias raised his hands, the cutlass still in one, his voice steady despite the ice in his veins. "I meant no disrespect," he said, the words cutting through the morning air. "I buried him to keep him safe, not to steal his soul." He pointed toward the hidden grove, where the grave lay beneath whispering palms. The warriors' grips tightened on their weapons, their murmurs rising like a storm. Cale stepped closer, his eyes narrowing, a spear in hand that could end Elias with one thrust. "You a pirate speak of honor?" he spat. "Your kind only know greed." The accusation stung, not because it was false but because it was half-true. Elias had been a pirate, a man of blood and gold, until mercy cost him his ship and his crew. Now that same mercy had brought a tribe to his door, their war chants echoing like the ghosts of his past. Then a voice cut through the tension, sharp and clear as a bell. "Father, wait." A young woman stepped forward, her dark hair braided with shells, her eyes fierce yet searching. Lyra, the chieftain's daughter, held the same carved amulet Elias had buried with the boy. Her brother. Her gaze locked onto Elias, not with hatred but with a question. "This amulet," she said, holding it up, its spirals catching the light. "You left it with him. Why?" The warriors fell silent, their spears still raised but their eyes on her. Elias swallowed, his throat dry as the sand beneath his boots. "It was his," he said. "It felt right. Like he'd want it with him." Lyra's fingers tightened around the amulet, her voice trembling. "My brother was murdered. Not by you but by pirates. Men who sail a ship called the Black Dawn." Elias's blood turned to ice. His ship. His betrayal. The mutineers who'd left him for dead were the same ones who'd slit her brother's throat. The air grew heavier, the cove alive with the scent of salt and tension. Lyra turned to her father, her voice rising. "If this man meant to harm us, why bury Tano with care? Why mark his grave with a stone?" Cale's face darkened, torn between grief and doubt. The warriors shifted, their war paint streaking with sweat, their murmurs growing louder. Elias saw the fracture. Lyra's words had planted a seed, a crack in their certainty. But 100 spears still pointed at him, and one wrong word could turn the beach red. He took a step forward, his cutlass lowered but not sheathed. "I'm no saint," he said, his voice raw. "I was a pirate, yes. But I buried your son because I know what it's to lose everything. I couldn't leave him to the crabs and the tide." The truth hung between them, fragile as a spider's web. Cale's spear didn't waver, but his eyes flickered, searching Elias's face for lies. Lyra stepped between her father and Elias, a bold move that silenced the drums. "He speaks of Tano's grave," she said. "Let him show us. If he lies, we'll know. If he speaks true, we may have a common enemy." The warriors exchanged glances, their chants fading into the crash of waves. Cale's jaw tightened, his pride warring with his daughter's plea. Elias felt the weight of 100 stares, each one a judgment. He could run, dive into the sea, take his chances with the sharks. Or he could lead them to the grave, risk everything on the truth. The amulet's carvings flashed in his mind, spirals and stars that tied him to a boy he'd never known. The drums beat once, twice, then stopped. Cale lowered his spear just an inch. "Show me my son," he said, his voice low but deadly. and pray your words hold truth. The grove was a short walk, but it felt like a march to the gallows. Elias led the way, Kale and Lyra at his heels, the warriors fanning out like wolves on a hunt. The palms whispered secrets, the air thick with the tang of seaweed and salt. Elias's heart pounded, his mind racing. Had he covered the grave well enough? Would they see his care, or only a pirate's deception? The cove, once his refuge, now felt like a noose tightening around his neck. And out there, beyond the horizon, the Black Dawn sailed with the men who'd betrayed him, and murdered Lyra's brother. The truth was a dangerous thing, but it was all he had. If you were Elias, would you stand your ground against 100 warriors, or plead for mercy with the truth? Would you risk your life to prove a kindness, or fight to keep your secrets buried? Drop your choice in the comments. I need to know what you do when the spears are raised. If this tale of courage and confrontation has you hooked, smash that subscribe button, because what happens at that grave will change everything. The drums are silent now, but the storm is far from over. The grove was silent, save for the whisper of palm fronds and the distant crash of waves against the cove's jagged cliffs. Captain Elias Kane stood beside the grave, the smooth stone marking the islander's resting place glinting under the Caribbean sun. Chieftain Kale knelt, his fingers tracing the earth where his son Tano lay. The amulet, returned by Elias, rested in Kale's palm, its spirals and stars catching the light like a promise kept. 100 warriors stood watch, their spears lowered but eyes sharp, waiting for their leader's verdict. Lyra, Kale's daughter, broke the silence, her voice steady as the tide. "This man buried Tano with care," she said, her gaze shifting from her father to Elias. "The killers sailed the Black Dawn, his ship stolen by traitors. They're our common enemy." Elias's heart thudded like a cannon's echo. His past had collided with the present, and the cove, once his prison, was now a crossroads. Kale rose, his face unreadable, and extended a hand. "Help us take back your ship," he said, "and you'll earn our trust. A truce. A chance. A risk as deadly as a squall at sea." The islanders' camp sprawled across a hidden lagoon, fires flickering like stars against the dusk, their smoke curling with the scent of roasted fish and damp wood. Elias sat among the warriors, an outsider under scrutiny, his rusty cutlass a poor companion against their carved spears. Lyra mapped the plan on a stretch of sand, her finger tracing the reef where the Black Dawn anchored, its mutinous crew unaware of the storm brewing. "They're moored here," she said, her voice sharp with purpose. 10 men, maybe 12, with muskets and cannons. Elias nodded, his mind charting the ship's layout, every plank, every weakness. He knew her like a lover, the creak of her deck, the blind spot by the aft cannon, the rope ladder that could be cut in a heartbeat. But facing his old crew meant facing his shame, the moment he'd spared a rival captain only to lose everything. "We hit at night," Elias said, his voice low, rough as the coral underfoot. "Use the storm for cover. Their greed makes them sloppy." Kale's eyes gleamed with approval, but his warriors murmured, their trust as fragile as sea glass. Elias's past weighed heavier than the cutlass at his hip. 5 years ago he'd stood on the Black Dawn's deck, a rival captain at his mercy. The man had begged, tears mixing with blood, and Elias, fool that he was, let him live. His crew saw weakness, not mercy. That night, knives flashed, and his first mate, Jericho, led the mutiny. "You're no captain," Jericho had sneered as the crew sailed off, leaving Elias bleeding on a dinghy. The memory burned, but burying Tano had stirred something in him, a spark of the man who'd once believed in more than gold. Lyra's voice pulled him back. "Tano died protecting me," she said, her eyes meeting his, raw with grief. "He saw your ship, tried to warn us. They cut him down for it." Her loss mirrored his betrayal, sacrifice, a wound that never healed. In that moment, Elias knew he'd fight, not just for his ship, but for her. For Tano. For the man he might still become. The plan took shape under the stars, the camp alive with war chants that thrummed like a pulse. Elias taught the warriors the ship's weak points, the powder kegs below deck, the mast's rigging that could be slashed to cripple her. Lyra added her own tactics, canoes gliding silent as sharks, warriors striking from the shadows. Kale assigned 10 of his best, their war paint streaked with purpose, their spears honed to razor edges. The storm brewing on the horizon was their ally, its winds promising chaos to mask their approach. Elias felt the old thrill of battle, the kind that once made him a legend. But this wasn't for glory. It was for redemption, for a boy's grave, for a tribe that might call him brother. The warriors clasped his arms, a gesture of trust that felt heavier than any treasure. Lyra's gaze lingered on him, her eyes a mix of fire and faith. "We sail at midnight," she said. "Don't make me regret this." As the moon dipped low, Elias and the warriors launched their canoes, the sea black as ink beneath a sky heavy with clouds. The paddles dipped silently, slicing through waves that hissed like serpents. Elias navigated by the stars he hadn't followed since his pirating days, their light faint but true. The reef loomed ahead, and there she was, the Black Dawn, her silhouette a ghost from his past, her lantern swaying in the growing wind. Thunder rumbled, a warning of the storm's approach. The mutineers' laughter carried over the water, careless, drunk on stolen rum. Elias's grip tightened on his cutlass, his blood singing with purpose. The canoes fanned out, shadows among shadows as lightning cracked the sky. The battle was coming, and with it, a chance to reclaim not just his ship but his soul. If you were Elias, would you sail into a storm for a chance at redemption, or stay safe in the shadows of your past? Would you trust the tribe that once raised spears against you, or fight alone? Drop your choice in the comments. I need to know what you'd risk for a second chance. If this tale of alliance and vengeance has you hooked, smash that subscribe button because the battle for the Black Dawn is about to explode. The storm is here. The ship is in sight. And Elias's fate hangs on the edge of a blade. Lightning split the sky, turning the Caribbean night into a battlefield of shadows and fire. Captain Elias Kane clung to the edge of a war canoe, the storm's howl drowning out the thud of his heart. The Black Dawn loomed ahead, her hull a dark specter against the reef, her lanterns swaying like drunken stars. The mutineers' laughter echoed over the waves, careless, oblivious to the 10 islander warriors gliding through the sea like sharks. Lyra, her war paint streaked with rain, signaled the attack, her eyes fierce as the storm itself. Elias's cutlass felt alive in his hand, its rusty edge hungry for redemption. 5 years ago these men stole his ship, his life, his name. 3 days ago they slit a boy's throat and left him for the tide. Now Elias and the tribe would take it all back, or die trying. The canoes closed in, silent as death. Thunder roared. The battle began. Elias boarded the Black Dawn first, his boots hitting the deck like a cannon's shot. The mutineers froze, rum bottles slipping from their hands, their faces pale as the lightning. "Kane?" one gasped as if seeing a ghost. Elias didn't answer. His cutlass flashed, cutting down the nearest man before he could draw. The warriors surged behind him, their spears slicing through the chaos, their war cries merging with the storm's fury. Jericho, the mutinous first mate, stood at the helm, his smirk as sharp as the blade in his hand. "Still soft, Kane?" he taunted, raising a musket. Elias dove behind a cannon as the shot rang out, splintering wood where his head had been. Lyra's warriors struck like lightning, their spears finding gaps in the mutineers' drunken defenses. The deck became a slaughterhouse, blood mixing with rain, bodies falling to the sea's embrace. Elias fought his way forward, each swing of his blade a reckoning for his past. Then Lyra's shout cut through the fray. She stood over a mutineer, his throat pinned by her spear, a familiar amulet dangling from his neck. Tano's killer. Her brother's carved relic gleamed in the storm's light, its spirals and stars a silent accusation. The man begged, his voice lost in the wind, but Lyra's eyes burned with a grief too deep for mercy. Yet she paused. "This amulet," she said, her voice trembling, "marks a protector of our people. A prophecy." She looked at Elias, her spear still raised. "You buried Tano with it. You're tied to us now." The words hit Elias harder than any blade. The amulet wasn't just a trinket, it was a call, a destiny he'd stumbled into by chance. Or fate. Lyra spared the killer, binding his hands, her choice echoing Elias's own mercy years ago. The warriors rallied, their resolve unbreakable, and the mutineers fell one by one. Jericho's final stand ended with Elias's cutlass at his throat, the storm's roar drowning out his pleas. The Black Dawn was his again. The storm passed, leaving the ship battered but whole, her sails catching the first light of dawn. Elias stood at the helm, the wheel familiar under his hands, the sea stretching endless before him. Kale and the warriors gathered on deck, their war paint smudged but their eyes bright with victory. Lyra approached, the amulet now around her neck, a symbol of her brother's legacy and Elias's new role. "You fought for Tano," Kale said, his voice steady as the tide. "You're no pirate to us. You're family." The warriors raised their spears, not in threat but in honor, their chant a rhythm of acceptance. Elias's throat tightened. 5 years of solitude, of guilt, of loss, dissolved in that moment. He'd reclaimed his ship, but more, he'd found a purpose. The tribe would guard these waters and he'd sail with them, a protector bound by a boy's grave and an amulet's promise. Years later, the cove was no longer a hermit's hideaway. It buzzed with life, traders, islanders, even former pirates seeking peace. Elias's legend grew not as a terror of the seas, but as a man who buried a stranger and earned a tribe's trust. Lyra, now a chieftain in her own right, visited often, sharing meals under the stars, their laughter mingling with the crash of waves. The Black Dawn sailed again, her sails patched but proud, guarding the islands from those who'd prey on the weak. One evening, as Elias scanned the horizon, a new ship appeared, a strange flag, a shadow of trouble to come. He gripped the amulet, now his own, its carvings a reminder of the man he'd become. The sea was calling again and he was ready. If you were Elias, would you sail into the unknown for a tribe that called you family, or stay safe in the cove you'd fought to keep? Would you embrace a prophecy, or carve your own path? Drop your choice in the comments. I need to know what you do when the sea calls. If this tale of redemption and battle has you hooked, smash that subscribe button, because Elias's next adventure will twist your heart like a storm at sea. Click the video on your screen for a story even wilder than this one. The horizon's never empty, and the waves always bring trouble,